Absolutely. And Allison, thank you for having me on today. It has been a pleasure working with you in building cybersecurity. Um, so, real quick history of myself, and I'll try to keep it concise. Um, Before 2000, I worked in the IT industry, and I don't consider myself an IT guy anymore because that was 25 years ago. I'm getting old. Anyway, um, so I started on in this new career path, which was building control systems in 2000. And over the years, I've been fortunate enough to work with even Fortune 50 companies. And the commonality with all of them was when I moved from IT to OT, it was like a culture shock. Because as IT is a little more prescriptive, a little more rigid, and that kind of thing. With OT, back then and even now, it was the Wild West. Well, 11 years ago, let's just say I had a situation that started me on my career path to do building control system cybersecurity, not industrial, but building, because it's been a void. Okay. And like I say, that's about 11 years ago. 5 years ago, I was fortunate enough to meet Lucian, and I got working with building cybersecurity, and I got to be on the technical working group. And Lucian will tell you this. He said, Fred's put in thousands of hours. That's not an exaggeration because we've been working on this standard for a long time. So that's where I got to meet you, and that I appreciate the opportunity to come on your podcast. Well, yeah, I mean, great way to set the stage for this, and to kind of a little bit further explain the disconnect. As I said, I started working in the controls industry as a system integrator. So I like to say I'm the problem. Okay. And I'm not picking on system integrators. It's just the way it was set up. So and I really don't care if you're a hospital, a bank, a data center. I mean, I've worked in all of those. Is there has been this full disconnect of IT and OT. And the OT guys want to, protect their domain, if you will, because really at the end of the day, all they care about is making sure the building's running. Okay. So if a problem arises, they just take care of it. They have viewed IT as a problem because anytime they brought them in, it's like, well, you got to blah, 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 and all this, and they go. So what they do is they just don't say anything, and they talk to the service provider, which will or talk to the service provider, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And the service provider has become the network people. So, like you said, these devices are digital. OT wants to protect their space. So, working with the service provider, me, we would go in and pull network cable, but then we would put in these magic little boxes that were called unmanaged switches because they were easy. I didn't have to know anything except how to plug up a cable, right? IT, quite frankly, especially years ago, was like, I don't need one more thing I got to take care of because IT has a lot to take care of. And therefore, that void was created. Now, we're trying to bring that void, we're trying to minimize the void and put them together because there is value in both knowledges. They have to work together. So, on the resilient side, I mean, I am cybersecurity. Building cybersecurity does deal with cybersecurity. However, people need to think about it in terms of it's not, you know, just just cybersecurity. What you're actually doing is you're putting in place things that will allow the systems or create an environment where the systems are more resilient. Their uptimes are better. Also, too, as you well know, in the IT world, there's practices, there's tabletops, there's things that, like, in the event an event happens, IT is somewhat prepared. I mean, you're never going to be prepared for every situation. In OT, we didn't do that. We put the systems in, set it, forget it, and as long as there's not a problem, everything's good. Well, when a situation happens and it's unplanned, most people go into what I call response paralysis. They, what do we do? Well, who do we talk to? Whatever. I mean, I've done assessments at places like military bases and hospitals, and when I ask them the question, okay, what is your response plan? Well, I mean, so and so knows what to do, and so knows what to do. So we got it covered. I said, okay, so and so just won the lottery, and this guy died. What are you gonna do? They're like, well, I mean, whatever. But anyway, the other disconnect is, um, I've run into situations at data centers where, and I've got examples of that, but the IT side is totally separate. There's so much in place to make sure that the servers stay up and all of that. The OT side is disconnected, right? Networks are not connected. But there is this interconnectedness of need between the two.
Mhm.
So, for example, if I go in and shut down all the cooling in a data center, is it going to affect anything? It's going to shut all the servers down. Even though there's no network connectivity, all the servers, as you know, will overheat and they'll start shutting down. So, to kind of maybe bring it home, when you're thinking about a resilient system, which includes both IT and OT, do not rely on the fact that they're not connected. If you made the decision, which is probably a good decision, not to connect them, don't overlook the fact that there may be some dependencies because let's forget a data center. If I shut your building down, what happens? Everybody goes home. IT side doesn't matter at that point. Nobody can do work. If they want to dial in once they get home, okay, that's fine. But if I've disabled cooling in the building, again, there's impacts that the two can cause to each other. Sure. So, wow, there's a lot to unpack there because when I think threats, I, and I hope you don't take this the wrong way,
No,
IT
no,
can
no.
be a threat. Okay, and I don't mean it's just that lack of understanding, right?
Yeah,
So before we get into the actual of cyber attacks, um, overzealous IT teams can actually create a lot of problems. For example, using what you just said about the temperatures and all that,
yeah.
I was working with a hospital group, and I mean, if I'd have written this, I probably wouldn't have done it this perfectly. But I was literally going on site with the head of facility operations. The woman had been in IT and she moved over to facility operations and she had learned a lot about it. And she was very good at, you know, trying to convey to the guys, what IT is trying to do. Well, IT got all invested and said, okay, well, we're going to start fixing everything, right? We were walking in the building. The building manager is coming out towards us and he goes, "What did y'all do?" And the lady said, "What do you mean?" He said, "We can't see our operatory suites." And she said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you guys pushed out." And she's, "First off, I'm with facility operations. I used to be in IT." So, well, IT pushed out Java updates. And this particular manufacturer, the head end, the thing that monitors all of the systems, was now locked up. And they weren't receiving temperature and airflow data
Mhm.
because the airflow in operatory suites has to be positive in
Yeah.
order to pull the bad stuff out. So they have to shut down surgeries. But it wasn't just this facility. They had pushed them out to 50 locations that perform surgeries. They had to cancel surgeries for 2 days while
Wow.
they got everything back up functioning. So look at that physical impact. No connectivity between the IT and the OT networks, but IT took over the control of the head ends, and the head end being this PC or server that the exactly.
Yeah.
And if there's no visualization into an operatory suite, you have to stop surgery because they have to make sure all these things are working right. Anyway, so
So
that exactly. It would have 100%, 100%. It's like, is this okay? Let me tell you what from the IT perspective. Let me tell you what we're planning on doing. What is the impact? The what is the impact is not necessarily discussed. And to maybe one quick other example is I went through and worked with this financial group their policies. And they said, "Fred, would you go through and find the OT gaps and write up, recommendations and we'll work with our IT team and put it all together." I said, "Sure." So I spent literally 3 weeks, I think it was, going through everything because they had a very good extensive IT policy. But there were things like patching an IT system and an OT system miles apart. So the people that had set up the project hadn't informed IT that that's what they were doing. And so I finished my thing. I sent it to them and I said, review this for 2 weeks and then we'll come together and we'll talk about it with your IT team. So I get on the call and it was myself, the project manager, and 30 IT guys from their company. And the first guy said, "I don't know what we're doing here. We have policy. We're not changing a thing." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "So what do you?" "What are you talking about? Is there something in particular?" And he said, other guy spoke up. He said, "Well, your patching policy, there's no way we're going to keep that." And I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, we're going to upgrade all the servers and do all this stuff because they've been running on Windows 2000 box." And I said, "Okay, let's stop right there. I'm going to take the building that you guys are in right now." I said, "There is a particular manufacturer, and it has the head end, and it has 40 devices in the building. What are you going to do to that head end?" They said, "Well, we're going to put the latest version of Windows Server on there." I said, "Did you cause a problem?" And they said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "If you take that server or that head end from 2000 Windows 2000 up to the latest version of server, the application will not run on that."
Yeah.
"Well, we'll just upgrade that." And I said, "Okay, I get it. But now you've broken communication to all of the supervisory controllers in the building." And I said, "Well, we'll just upgrade them too." I said, "Problem is the version that you have, those devices don't have enough horsepower to run it. So now you got to replace 40 devices, upgrade them. You can't just port the programming over, you have to reprogram them. So your one change out of that server just cost your company anywhere from 6 months to a year of repairs."
Wow.
And one of the other guys said, "Okay, let's listen to him." And now, exactly. I mean, when I think I'm not going to mention names, but there was a bank that was taking their ATMs from Windows CE to something else. They had to negotiate a agreement with Microsoft to continue to support them for several years because they at least they figured out they couldn't do it before they did it. But now let's talk about attacks, and I'm going to stay on the hospitals for just a second. I don't know if you've heard the term killware. Okay, you should
I
get Lucian to talk about it because he'll be very animated about it.
oh,
So years ago, when people were asking me what I did for a living, and I would say, "Well, I do cybersecurity for building control systems," and they're in their mind, they put me in the same box with IT. And I said, this is a little dramatic, but in a minute you'll see it. Maybe it's not. Is I said, "Well, wait. I I'm work with the kind of things that can actually kill you." They're like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, if I said nothing against IT, but it's data. In mine, it's the physical world." So
yeah.
I think it was about 3 years ago, the then head of Homeland Security coined the term killware. And what it means, it's not a particular virus, malware, or whatever. What it is any attack that results in human injury or death. So there was a hospital in Alabama and there was a hospital in Germany, I think it was. The hospital in Alabama, the ransomware, or ransomware got in there and locked up not only the IT side, but then all of the systems that interacted with like the BP monitors and air, all of that. So there was a woman had had a heart attack, and they were sending the woman to that hospital. And they said, we can't do anything with her right now. And she had had a heart attack. And so they said, you're going to need to go to such and such hospital. So they had to divert, but by the time they got there, they couldn't revive her. She's dead. Germany's worse. So in Germany, I believe it, I may have them backwards, but the end result at this other hospital, the same thing happened. A baby was having some life distress, and they called the hospital. The ambulance is coming in. The hospital didn't wave them off. Well, when they got in there, they couldn't use any of their equipment. The baby died.
Oh.
That's killware. So it's a real thing, and and if you ask other people that I know, other peers and stuff, I haven't personally been involved in a killware situation, but this one particular person, he's had about 10 of them throughout the world happen.
Wow.
And so it's a thing. But now on the more mundane, I guess you would, I've got a lot of bad guy examples, but I've got another example that is, as we all know, third party is a problem because not that they're doing anything nefarious, but they may not have the same due diligence as you. Okay.
Yes.
So to kind of set the stage, as I said, I was an SI. The company that I worked with had somewhere in the neighborhood of a couple of thousand buildings that they were responsible for. Those buildings started getting automated in 1998. We were doing it. In 1998, the company I was working for created a username and password that everybody knew in 1998. I came to work for them mid 2000s, 2006. They still use that same username and password. Okay. Let's just say you're the building owner. I didn't have to tell you that. You didn't ask me. And
Yes.
so, and there was an economic reason to do that because if I hired somebody new, I didn't have to add him to 2,000 systems and then the underlying devices. So if you multiply that times conservatively 30 devices per building, that's a big number. So exactly.
So
Okay. So yes, it is. And these I have been involved in. One particular scenario is they call me in and it's like, we need you to find out, prove who did this or whatever, get us the forensic data. But what happened was, well, let me back up. Studies show that if you fire somebody in 24 to 48 hours is when they're going to retaliate, right? I mean, if they get past that, they're calming down, that kind of thing. Well, let's just say you're the building owner. I'm a service provider. I fired one of my employees. I didn't tell you. This guy came in that night remotely because we hadn't even talked about that. These systems are so wide open, anybody can get to them. But this employee came in, same username and password as everybody else, went into the system, bricked, and when I say bricked, bricked a controllers. A controller becomes non-functional. You might as well throw it in the garbage can. Yeah. He bricked 3 of the controllers and he reset the 3 servers, which were really only PCs, but he went in and, sent it through reset and it screwed it up. And so he did the 2, and the last one he was on, he did the same thing to it. So they were in scramble mode to get it all back up. But I said, I can't prove who did it. And right. He said, but we know who did it. And we just need you to get the information out. I said, I can get it out. We can show an IP address, but IP addresses can be spoofed, which if the audience doesn't know what that means, is I can be coming from one IP address, but I can make it look like I'm coming from another.
Mhm.
I find the username and password in there if I find it, because he's wiped all this stuff out. But if I find it, it's going to be, let's just say, admin. Take that to court and try to prove it. So that is a problem, and it's happened more times than I can count. The forensic data is really not reliable.
Yeah.
So to the integration of IT and OT, so let's use that example. Um, the system, the control systems that were in that building were not on a network that IT could even see. Those systems were exposed publicly, remotely, where anybody could get into the system. Okay. Right. So to
Okay.
point the fingers back at myself, it was common practice back in the day. Well, it still is. But from the aspect of ease of access, as a system integrator, the guy would say, "Hey, we want to be able to check this system from our home." Okay, no problem. We'll get a cable modem in here. We'll get a block of public IPs, and we'll just either put the IP directly in the device, the head in,
Yeah.
or we'll just we can just point it to it. And they're like, "Okay, good." So the none. The only thing that kept well, I mean, if we had time, I'd take you
I
on
know.
the senses and show you all kind of exposure.
Oh,
But the the only thing between that device and the person is a username and password.
okay.
We both know if you go on your bank and you try to log in 3 times, what happens? On a control system, there are ways you can do that. You can check a box and say 3 times, and it will lock you out. But the reality is, nobody does it. So I can run a password cracker at a control system and let it churn away, and I'll get in. So that's the way a lot of these systems are set up, or they're set up with TeamViewer and log me in with no oversight, no control. And just like in the case of what I told you, it was TeamViewer. He knew the username and password for TeamViewer, and he knew the username and password to get into the system. So there are no policies that require the owner to the service provider to notify the owner that they've let somebody go, and they don't want to because they don't want to change all these username and passwords. Now, you can put a layer of multi-factor in front of it, and that'll, help tremendously. But anyway, so the system is all by itself on its own. The other is if IT is involved, this is the intersection. If you take stock of what you got, which most people don't, is take stock. Okay, I have this network that's off by itself. People tell me, "Oh well, it's air gap," and my response is, "Oh, that means you're not looking at it." And there's been so many air gap networks that have been compromised. But anyway, um, you this is where IT and OT need to work together. Let them monitor it because if somebody comes in and there's the firewalls and everything in place, if somebody were to get past them, IT can shut it down. I
Mhm.
mean, let IT help you protect your systems because that's not what you're good at. And
Yeah.
that's not an indictment on you. You are good at keeping this building running. And that's what we want you to do. Let IT do their job. But you gotta come together. Go ahead. So, as we've said it from almost the onset of this conversation, is there has to be collaboration.
Okay.
That's the beginning of a best practice, and collaboration has to have owners. You have to have owners of your lane. So, for example, is if I'll use a hospital. We'll stay on 'em.
'Cause
Yeah, it is.
it's
Yeah.
crit
But it's applicable to anybody. So, in a hospital, for example, working with hospital groups, I can't tell you the number of times that we're going through and we're assessing and the HVAC guys inside the building and the power guys inside the building. Yeah, we got our system and we kind of understand their system and we kind of collaborate and help each other out and everything. And IT's like, well, we've got the servers and all this. And I say, okay, who's monitoring the UPSs?
Mhm.
And it's like, well, they are. No, they are. Okay. So who's monitoring the CT scanners? Not the action, but the control, the access control. Are they hooked to the network? Um, who's looking at the elevators? Well, I won't use their name, but a common elevator people that we know. And I said, in this one hospital, I said, have you looked at it? And I said, "It's exposed." And they're like, "No, no, we don't allow that." I said, "Come on. And I had never been in this building, never been to this where the elevator control is. I said, "What's that?" And they said, "It's a cell modem." I said, "In your SLA, this elevator company services your elevator, checks it, they monitor it using this." And they're like, "Well, okay, well, it's only for the company." And I said, "You gonna rest on that? Is that what you're gonna base your security on?" And that was IT I was talking to. And so, anyway, the whole thing about who owns what needs to be established. The next thing is I had 3 questions that I asked people right off the bat. Do you know what you have? Do you know who has access? And do you know how it's connected? Because if you can't answer all 3, you really can't start your cybersecurity journey. That is the beginning, and as you know, even in IT, you gotta know who has access, know how things are connected, and what you have. 90% of the assessments that I do, n there's not an accurate accounting of all the devices.
Oh,
Exactly. I mean,
and
right. I mean, I can what you described, and I kinda equate it to the some of the IT side, is kinda like a data flow diagram.
yeah,
But it's what system talks to what, who does what. And here's another thing on the best practices is, as BCS is based on ISA 62443, and they have a very clearly defined thing called zones and conduits, which is kinda more or less software-defined networks. But in the OT perspective, for example, if I have a HVAC system and somebody brings in a lighting system, I want and this happens all the time. There's a scheduler in the HVAC system that turns on the building in the morning. What happens is when they start automating lighting and that kind of thing, well, we'll just sync up the schedules. So we'll let the HVAC system turn the lights on. Okay, so this is how they do it. I did it. Again, pointing at myself. Okay, we'll give lighting access to our HVAC system wide open. I mean, if I get in the lighting system, I am in the HVAC system and vice versa. But what's interesting is I look, I've kind of studied that over the years, but um, I think that Target had a security team and an IT team. The
mhm,
IT team said, "We see something." They did see something. If you look at the Brian Krebs articles, Krebs on Security, it talks about they saw activity that was they didn't think was right. They alerted security. Security said, "Oh, it's nothing." And that happened twice. I think it happened twice.
wow,
So there was a little bit, but then it's like, well, who's worried about that? So,
yeah,
um, but using what you just said about having the data flows and everything, it does go back to how's it connected, and these people do not usually have that. They don't know all the things. Real quick example: I went to Australia working with a financial group. I met the HVAC vendor and I said, "I'm here to assess the system." And the guy said, "What do you need?" I said, "Well, I'm going to check what's connected to the system." He said, "Well, I can give you that. There's only 4 devices connected." And I said, "Yeah, but they didn't fly me from here to Australia to take your word, no offense." And he said, "I get it. Go, here's where you plug up." So I plugged up. There were 32 devices on that network. One of them was a Raspberry Pi. This is a financial company. And I said, did you see the article that came out about 3 weeks ago from the Jet Propulsion Lab? Mhm. Somebody had stuck a Raspberry Pi on their network. They didn't know who it was, and somebody had exfiltrated about half a gig worth of sensitive information. Y'all need to go find that thing and unplug it. It took them 2 weeks. But let's go back to the fact that there were 32 devices on there. And they were like, how does this happen? We started talking. Well, this guy plugged us in. Well, we can get communication this way. Pew, 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 pew. But there was no mapping of what that was. And the Raspberry Pi, nobody fessed up. I don't know who did it, but it took them 2 weeks to find it. Exactly. Well, you said old buildings, which is the majority of what's out there. I mean, there are systems that are 20 years old and even older. So it's a it can be overwhelming to people. And what I tell them is like, look, you can't eat this elephant all at one time.
Yeah.
So going back to my 3 questions, just answer those.
Okay.
Just answer those, and then begin to remediate, mitigate the things that you
Yes.
find,
Mhm.
and then go through a maturing process because I've sat beside colleagues on panels and things like that, and I'm listening to them, and they're talking, all this stuff, and I'm looking at the audience and they're, whatever. They're scared to death. It's like, wait a minute, guys. We are dealing with a group of individuals that are in elementary school, and you're handing them a college algebra book. We
Yeah.
got to start with 1 + 1 equals 2.
Right?
Right, and recommendations that are turning into cases where people have gotten fined or sued by the FTC and the SEC. I want to make a plug for our organization, Building Cybersecurity. So, what we did with Building Cybersecurity is we spent years working on a standard based on 62443, but we realized we need to boil it down for the beginner. So, if you go to buildingcybersecurity.org, it automatically loads up and it gives you 18 fundamental things you need to look at.
Yes.
So there is a, for lack of a Cliff Notes version of all this stuff.
Yes.
So go to buildingcybersecurity.org. Absolutely. So I can't remember what the article was just recently, exactly what Australia did, but I got to give kudos to Australia. Um, Back when I went and did that assessment on several of their buildings and the organization, they adopted something that I know it's a tough thing for people to swallow, but I thought like, wow, this is perfect. So we put together criteria for them to assess, basically ask questions of their vendors. Are you doing this? Are you doing this? What is this? That kind of thing. But again, it wasn't overwhelming. I think there was maybe 30 areas, questions that they had. And what this organization did was they said, okay, you have 2 weeks to fill this out. If you don't, you will be flagged in our system as on probation.
Okay.
If in another 60 days you have not answered this and at least have 50% or better compliant, you will then be put on, we won't be buying from you until you get it straight. And if you don't get it straight in another 60 days, you're not on our vendor list anymore. That's pretty severe, but it was very effective. What is magic magnet quenching? Is it where
So
they stick or something? Really? Wow. Well, as I said, the Australia example is severe. Realistically, and to defend the SIs, we would create a service level agreement with you or the building owner,
Yep.
and it was dependent on certain aspects like availability. I can remotely get to things, yada yada yada. And so when I start reviewing those kind of things with the company, I will tell them up front, understand everything that I'm going to give you will have a financial impact in some way. So let's prioritize. You're going to have a SLA, either you're going to, when it comes up on its renewal date, you can add some of these in, but your SI is you're adapting them. So it may be that you, like, if I gave you 20 things that were a problem, because most people don't, from an OT perspective, on their service agreements, it's about function, serviceability, and that kind of thing. It's not about cybersecurity. So it's a planned maturing, just like with your own cybersecurity practices. If you've never done them, you don't just start at square nine, you start at square one.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a process internally and externally. I don't know. Thank you. Yeah.